Walking into my home, I saw my wife and my bandmate, Carl, in my father's treasured rocking chair. The sight was a punch to the gut, shattering my heart and our band. The rage and sorrow were overwhelming. In that moment, I faced the toughest decision of my life. This is my journey through the storm of betrayal. What path will I choose? Stay tuned to see. I swear I'll never hear "Long, Cool Woman in a Black Dress" without thinking of that rocking chair. Songs do this to us. They bring back moments from our past. That chair was made by Sam Malouf before he died, and it cost my dad $20,000 over 20 years ago. A rocking chair, you ask? Yes, but it's more than that. It's a work of art, made of Clara walnut, hand-sculpted with smooth joints and very comfortable. It was the only thing my father left me that was worth anything. I liked it a lot. So I walked into my house in Brentwood and heard the stereo blaring. The music started with bells and echoes, then moved into powerful chords and vocals. Great arrangement, harder than most people realize. Not my favorite song, but still great. I stopped and listened to the lead vocals, heavy with reverb, making it hard to understand. Saturday night, I was downtown working for the FBI. I followed the music, tossing my jacket over the couch, and walked into the living room at the back of the house. It had been a long day at the office, negotiating a new record deal. All I wanted was to sit in my chair, have a beer, and maybe see if Tara was ready for a change. She always got edgy before filming the new season, and we hadn't been intimate for almost 2 weeks. I walked into the living room and froze. Tara was ready, all right. There she was, naked, in my Malouf chair. She had cheated on me with my bandmate, Carl. What could I do? If I attacked them, we'd be all over the news for a year. Besides, I couldn't afford to hurt my hands or Carl's. The band needed us both for our new record deal. So I did nothing. I just walked into the bedroom down the hall. I was putting on a fresh shirt when I saw Tara's reflection in the mirror. "Where are you going?" she asked, not looking me in the eyes. I tried to smile but couldn't. I just stared at her. Tara Boyd, a teen idol, now a glamorous star of one of the highest-rated shows. My wife, my life. Now, apparently neither. "We didn't want this to happen," she said, sitting on the bed as I rummaged through the closet. I found a large duffel bag and started filling it with clothes. Once it was full, I dragged it to the dresser and threw in underwear and socks. "That's all?" Tara said. "You won't even say anything?" I ignored her. I never thought about how I'd feel if something like this happened to me. I thought I'd go crazy, but I just felt tired and sad. I had no energy left. "Damn it, Nick, say something!" she screamed. "What do you want me to say?" I exploded, pushing the bag to the floor. "Is there a guide on how to deal with your wife and your friend being lovers? What do you want me to say?" "You could have given me some hints, prepared me a little," I said. Then all my energy disappeared again, and I just wanted to leave. I dragged my bag past Tara, stopping in the bathroom to get my toothbrush and shaving supplies. With everything packed, I dragged the bag to the garage, threw it in my Escalade, and went back to the house. Carl was sitting in the rocking chair, lacing his shoes. "Listen, Nick," he began, but I didn't want to hear it. "I just want my chair," I said. He jumped out of it. I lifted the chair and looked at the 9 Grammys and the stack of decorated albums in the display case. "You and Tara can pack my things. Send them to my mom's house," I said, ignoring him. "I'll make all the arrangements from there." I put the chair in the back seat of the Escalade next to a couple of guitars and got in the car. "Nick," Carl begged, "please let me explain." I didn't want to hear it. "We didn't want this to happen," he continued. "You were supposed to be in negotiations all day." I stared at him. "So what didn't you want? Sleeping with her or me catching you?" I didn't wait for his answer and drove away quickly. I was now 3 hours away, over 250 miles west of LA. Let the whole city fall into the ocean. Well, not all of it, just Brentwood. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice rough from years of smoking. "Home," I said. "Home to Brentwood." "But you don't live there anymore," he said. "Yeah, well, things change," I said. "So that's it?" He grinned. "Just packed up and left?" I said nothing. He was silent for about 30 miles. "They're all like that," he finally said. "Not all," I objected. "No," he agreed. Just the ones you choose. I nodded. He was right. Why do you think so? He laughed, a deep, loud laugh that ended in a cough. Because you're a shallow jerk, that's why. Well, congratulations, I said. Looks like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Go to hell. I sighed. This was going nowhere and would lead to another fight. Then he would disappear again. Strangely, I wanted his company for a while. We were quiet for about 10 miles before I turned to him. He looked the same as always, thick gray hair, a big beard, and heavy features. His flannel shirt sleeves barely contained his large chest and arms. I could almost reach out and touch him, but I knew my hand would go right through him. Still, I could always smell a faint mix of cigarette smoke and cologne. You know, he finally said, you should have kicked his ass. And what would that do? He would know not to do it again. Oh, for God's sake, Walter, I said. He knew he shouldn't have done it from the start. And so did she. But that didn't stop them, did it? Walter shrugged. Probably not. But it would be easier on your soul than just leaving with your tail between your legs. Yes, I replied. Then my hands would be too swollen to play. The tabloids would go crazy and they'd still be sleeping with each other in my damn chair. My chair, he said. I made it. Yes, but now you're dead, I said. So now it's mine. He turned to look out the window, watching the desert night rush past us at 80 miles an hour. You're probably right, he said. I'd kick his ass anyway. We were approaching the junction from Interstate 15 to Interstate 70 when my cell phone rang. It was almost 11, and I had been on the road for almost 8 hours. The phone broke the monotony, and I realized I was getting tired. I looked at the display and decided to answer. Hey, John, I said to our lead guitarist. Nick, where the hell are you? He yelled. I could hear the loud noise of a nightclub in the background. Utah, I said. What the hell are you doing in Utah? I'm on my way, I heard John shout to someone else. Then he came back to the phone. Nick, you need to come back. You're our main man, and we're close to a big deal. Let Ethan handle it, I replied. Ethan Rose was our manager, and he could handle this without us. Dude, John whined. You know he can't do it without you. They want to know our plans. Ethan can't handle this. Only you can, man. Let me think, I said, and closed the phone before turning it off. We formed Lead Foot when I was a sophomore at Granite City High School. There were 4 of us. Teddy Cooper on lead guitar, Carl Simpson on bass, Vince Diamond on drums, and me on rhythm guitar and lead vocals. The others sang harmonies, and we had a sound similar to the Eagles. Halfway through our junior year, Teddy discovered alternative country rock. I'll never forget the day I walked into his bedroom, dual vocal harmonies played over plucked acoustic guitar and slide leads. Who is this? I asked, instantly loving it. Jayhawks, he said, his eyes glued to the lyric sheet. This is amazing, I commented. He simply nodded. For the next 3 hours, we listened to Hollywood Town Hall over and over again. To this day, I think about that day every time I hear Two Angels. The very next day, Teddy and I started writing our first song. The music came quickly, but the lyrics were harder. Then Teddy started reading more serious stuff. Poetry, Shakespeare, the Bible. It inspired him, and he was right. Soon, we were writing lyrics and music left and right. The summer after high school, Leadfoot won a talent contest at the Lincoln County Fair, which earned us a trip to the Illinois State Fair. There, we were surrounded by ballet dancers, jugglers, magicians, and other musicians. We performed 3 songs with tight harmonies. When it was over, the crowd was on our side. Let's be clear, when 50-year-old farmers and their wives are stomping their feet to teenage music, you're on to something. The crowd booed when we got second place to a cute tap-dancing girl. After the show, a 30-year-old guy in trousers, hair gel, and shiny jewelry approached us. His name was Ethan Rose, a talent scout for Harmony Records. They were looking for something new and asked if we wanted to meet some people. We did, and spent the next 3 weeks auditioning in Nashville and Memphis. A month later, deep into our first semester of college, Ethan contacted us with a recording contract offer. That's when the problem started. Teddy decided he didn't want to stay in the group. He thought we'd become puppets for the music industry, selling out for money. I told him it was nonsense, but he was afraid of failing on tour and didn't want to risk the good things he already had. He was always the smartest of us and had a full academic scholarship. He didn't want to be a superstar. He wanted to be a teacher. So he left, and Ethan found a replacement for us over the Christmas holidays. Carl, Vince, and I flew to Memphis to begin rehearsals and auditions for a new lead guitarist. With Ethan's help and pressure from the record company, we chose John Baumer. John was 4 years older than us, but he played guitar like a pro. He had been a studio musician for 3 years, a teenage prodigy looking for the right opportunity. The record company thought he'd be perfect as our lead guitarist. They were right. He also had a nice tenor voice and helped me with songwriting. He wasn't good at writing lyrics, so that was my job. Carl and Vince were happy to just play their instruments and sing when needed. Our first album, Somewhere Down Highway 66, went multi-platinum. Our second album, Plains States, was our only diamond album with over 13 million copies sold. Some of our later albums did well, but we've mainly ridden the success of our first 2 albums for the last 6 years. Now we're negotiating a new recording contract. Harmony sold our contract, and Columbia wanted a 5-album deal. We were profitable, but they wanted guarantees we wouldn't fizzle out. That's where I came in. The band needed a solid pipeline of songs, and I was the one to provide it. The problem was we didn't have many good songs. We had plenty of mediocre ones that might sell because of our name, but we were stuck, and I knew it. The other guys, including Ethan, didn't want to hear it. They just wanted to sell it and make money. Unfortunately, Columbia saw through it and negotiated hard. So here I was, trying to save the band, make money, and keep our fans happy. And what gratitude did I get? Criticism and Carl sleeping with my wife. What a thank you. After checking into the hotel, I carried my bag into the room, plugged in my phone, turned on the air conditioning, and collapsed on the bed. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow, dreaming restless dreams featuring Tara. The phone started ringing again and again. I woke up shivering as the air conditioning cooled the sweat on my face and shirt. I reached for my phone. "Hi, Ethan," I said. "Where the hell are you, Nick?" he said. "I won't be back for a while, Ethan," I said. "You'll have to figure it out on your own. Just don't sign anything until I read it, okay?" He was silent for a minute. "Nick, are you saying what I think you're saying?" I said nothing. "Please tell me you're not thinking about running away from us. Just don't sign anything, Ethan. Got it? We'll get rid of Carl if we have to. We can't lose you." "We'll talk later," I said. "Do your best, but don't sign anything until I agree." I hung up before he could say more. It was dark outside, and the clock showed almost 10. I had slept enough, so I showered, changed into clean clothes, and hit the road again. Between the landscape, nightmares, and the conversation with Ethan, I couldn't get out of Nebraska fast enough. 3.5 hours later, I was in Iowa. "So, are you going to give it all up?" said Walter. "Groupies, money?" "I don't know," I said, and I really didn't. "But think about it," he continued. Ethan was right. If you're too scared to kick Carl out, let the group do it. Why should you be the one to run away? Then you'll have the band, money, fame, and revenge on Carl. Where will he go without you? "Maybe I was going to leave anyway," I suggested. He snorted. "You remember what it was like, being on top of the world after the first few albums, then it all crashing down because you got caught up in fame?" I thought of good lines for a song. Walter was silent for about an hour, and I focused on driving. Iowa wasn't much better than Nebraska, but at least it had hills. "I brought it back, you know," Walter said, interrupting my thoughts. "I remember," I said. "That wasn't why I left, Nick." I said nothing. It was over long before I left. Trudy just made it easier. "Yeah," he said. "I was a mess. Fame ruined everything, not Trudy. I don't want to relive all of this, okay?" "That's not the point," Walter said. "The point is, I brought it back. My last 3 books were my best work, and all you have to do is leave your family." "Damn it," he thundered. "I didn't abandon my family. Your mother and I were done a long time ago, and I was never a good father to you, even when we were together." I laughed. "You can do it again." "You don't understand," he said. "Fame, all these fancy dinners, Hollywood stars, cameras, and interviews, they destroyed me. I lost my purpose and didn't realize it until my 3rd bestseller in a row. I couldn't stay in Nevada with you and your mom. She wasn't leaving. And by then, I hadn't been a good husband or father for too long to remember. Trudy brought me back to Earth. She took me to the mountains and I brought everything back. So what are you saying? Leave your wife, move to the mountains, meditate a few hours a day, and everything will come back? He sighed. You should leave your wife because she's selfish, not just to get your energy back, and I warned you about her before the wedding, remember? This was our last conversation before he died in a climbing accident, and that's exactly what he said about her. I slammed the phone down in anger and never spoke to him again. He died a year later. Anyway, he continued, giving her up is just getting rid of some extra baggage, so it's more of a bonus that it allows you to get your energy back. Is that what we were to you? Mom and me? Extra baggage? My voice was low, but I'm sure he heard the threat in my whisper. No, fool, I was a burden. Ask her when you see her. Ask Carol. She'll confirm it. I needed to do it for her. And for you. Believe it or not. Then, drowning in my grief, I vowed not to let it be in vain. I vowed to become who I was. I gave up booze, cigarettes, and women. Well, except for Trudy. I moved into that cabin on the lake and started writing again. It all came back. Not right away, but it came back. He spoke the truth. I knew this because I read all his books, even the bad ones. The first one, after divorcing my mother, was about a family breakdown. The mother was the heroine, and the little boy, presumably me, was the sympathetic character. The husband was a jerk, and Walter painted himself ruthlessly. The blame was entirely on him in the book, and he drew just enough flaws in Mom and me to make us believable without any guilt. Okay, I said, so I'm getting rid of the extra baggage and ditching Tara. Do you think that'll help? The guys in the band aren't helping, are they? So Ethan was right, he remarked. You're thinking about leaving completely, aren't you? I haven't decided yet, I said. It's just not fun anymore, you know. He nodded. Here's some free advice from your old man. You have enough money and God knows you've been working non-stop for the last 10 years. You're lucky. Most people work for 40 or 50 years and never achieve what you have. But you're lucky, so enjoy it. How? I asked. Simple, he said. If you want to leave, then leave. I nodded. Only one thing, though, he continued. Make sure you have something to do with all your free time. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. If you get bored, you'll end up like Truman Capote, an old ex-great telling everyone how great he was, even if he was. I was finally in Illinois, which is no more exciting than Iowa and only slightly more exciting than Nebraska. My cell phone rang. I looked at the number and hesitated before answering. Nick, are you there, honey? She said. I sighed. Nick, please talk to me, she said. How long has this been going on, Tara? I asked. Better to hit it straight away. Let's not talk about it now, she said, her voice a mix of little girl and how dare you talk about anything other than how wonderful I am. You wanted to talk, Tara, I said, and that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about it on the phone, she said. I want to sit down together in the same room, then we'll talk. But I don't want to sit with you now, I said. Where are you, Nick? I can come to you. I'm in Illinois, I replied. At your mom's house, I looked at my GPS. I'll be there in a few hours. Jesus, Nick, it's far away. You've been asleep since you left? Still, it was nice to be back home. Hello? I heard someone call from upstairs. Hey, Mom! I shouted back. It's Nick! Nick? I heard some noise from above. My eyes widened, and a smile spread across my face. It looked like she wasn't alone. Nick, what are you doing here? She said, wrapping herself in a robe as she walked downstairs. Caught you at a bad time, Mom? Get that smile off your face, young man, she said, tying her belt before running into my arms and hugging me tightly. I hugged her back. Too much time had passed. It was our first hug since I saw her off at the airport more than 18 months ago. She spent a week with us in Brentwood, and we hugged the same way the last time we saw each other. She let me go and stepped back, assessing me from head to toe. You look like crap, honey. Am I bothering you, Mom? If so, I can get a motel room for the night, let you get on with your business. Bob, she called upstairs. Get dressed and come down. My boy has come to visit his dear old mother. Bob? I said, raising my eyebrows. Like Dr. Bob, the chiropractor? She smiled. But Mom, I said, not knowing whether to be proud of her or embarrassed. He's 15 years younger than you. She nodded. Thank God he is, she said. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep up with me. "Hey, Nick," Dr. Bob called, tucking in his shirt. "This is a pleasant surprise." I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. "Sorry for the surprise visit," I said. "I should have called first." He quickly came down the stairs. "Nonsense," he said. "I'm glad to see you." Then Mom added, "We're already done." He blushed, but he looked at her with real affection. "Let's go," Mom said, turning and walking toward the kitchen. "Let me get you something. You look like you need it, Nick." My growling stomach proved her right. It had been over 40 hours since I left California, and I had only had a few candy bars, bottles of water, and a pre-made sandwich from a store. Bob and I chatted about the latest news in Grant City, while Mom made hot cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, my favorite food since childhood. No one made it better than Mom. The key was her homemade tomato soup, which she always kept in containers in the freezer. "How's Tara?" Bob asked when we were all sitting at the small kitchen table. I tried to smile, but it didn't work. "Problems?" Mom asked. "Her or you?" Bob asked. When my look showed I didn't understand, he clarified. "Who's cheating? Her, you, or both of you?" He laughed. "Still, you're in California now," I said. "She's with Carl." "Carl Simpson?" Mom asked. I nodded. "He's always been a jerk," she said, taking a bite of her sandwich. Bob coughed at her bluntness, almost spilling his soup. Mom has always been like this. If anyone could be more straightforward than Walter, it was Mom. That's why Walter loved her so much and why her students adored her. She called a spade, and her literary criticism didn't accept time-tested excuses. She thought Moby Dick was terrible and told anyone who would listen. Thaddeus Tybalt, president of Chadwick College, rarely appreciated her outspokenness, but he found it hard to get rid of a popular teacher with national academic recognition. She was a real find for Chadwick, much to his regret. "Carol," Bob finally managed to say. "Well, that's what he was, Bob," she said. "Little Eddie Haskell, pretending to be a good boy from day one." "You look great today, Mrs. Ross." "Did you change your hair, Mrs. Harlan?" Pathetic. Even when I was little, I smiled. She was right, but most parents were fine with it. Carl was always the most well-mannered, the most polite, and the first to offer help around the house. But when his parents weren't around, he was the first to take out a cigarette, a bottle of vodka, and cause trouble. He was fun, wild, and reckless. "So what are you going to do?" Bob asked. I shrugged, chewing the last bite of my sandwich. "I don't know," I said with my mouth full. After swallowing, I continued, "If it's okay, I'd like to stay here for a while, Mom. Just rest and think. It's hard to think in Los Angeles." She looked at me, thinking for a minute before nodding. "Well," she said, "it's okay with me if it's okay with Bob." My eyes widened. "Ben, we live together now," she said, reaching across the table and taking his hand. "You're kidding, right?" I looked at Bob, and he looked a little uncomfortable. "What about Elaine, Bob?" "She left me," he said. "A couple of years ago. Your mom and I have been living together for 8 months." "And you didn't think to tell me?" I asked Mom. "No," she said. "It's none of your business. If you cared, you would have called me, Nick. But you haven't. Not once in the 8 months we've been together." "Yes, I did. I called on Christmas Day." "It was New Year's," Bob said. "We woke up together and your mom asked if I was staying. I thought she meant a few hours, but she meant longer." I laughed. Suddenly, everything made sense. Bob and Mom went to a party on New Year's, got drunk, and ended up in bed together. Honestly, it was a good move for Bob. Even though he was 15 years younger than Mom, she still looked his age. Don't get me wrong, I'm no Oedipus, but I admit that Mom is beautiful in the life of any party, so it wasn't as weird as it seemed. "What's so funny?" she said, becoming angry. I ignored her. "So, Bob, what do you say? Can I stay here? I'll try not to disturb you." He saw my smile and smiled back. Then his face became serious, and he put his hand on my shoulder. "Well, son," he said. I couldn't help it and started laughing. The milk I had just drunk splashed out of my nose as I laughed at the whole situation that had suddenly become my life. I went to bed right after lunch and slept for 7 hours. When I woke up, I took a shower, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and went downstairs. The note on the refrigerator said it all. "I'm teaching class tonight, and Bob is in the office. You're on your own for dinner. Love, Carol." I didn't want to spend the evening alone in front of the TV. The last 2 days with Walter and the flat plains of the American Midwest left me wanting a crowd. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot at the hitching rail. I worked there first as a dishwasher and then as a cook when I was in school. The food was the best in town, think Chili's or TGI Fridays, but with homemade food instead of prepackaged, tasteless, expensive stuff. Judging by the full parking lot at 8:30 on a Thursday evening, they were still doing just fine. Seeing a full dining room, I headed to the bar and ordered a beer. "Nikki," someone called behind me, and I turned around. Victoria walked toward me, spreading her arms for a hug. "Hey, Vic!" I gasped as she hugged me tightly. "They said it was you, Nikki," she said, now holding my shoulders and looking me over. "I didn't believe them, but well, damn." Then she hugged me again. Victoria Wentworth and her husband Ron had owned the hitching rail for over 30 years. Ron ran the kitchen. Victoria ran the dining room. They were strict bosses. I quickly learned that being perfect was the only way to succeed in the restaurant business. But the high school kids they hired became part of the family, and they treated us like their children. Gifts for birthdays, cards with cash for graduation, and stern lectures for mistakes at work. They were the only ones who ever called me Nikki. "It's been too long, Nick," she said. "Years." I nodded. "You're right, it's been too long." I looked around, recognizing most of the visitors. Some nodded at me, and I nodded back and smiled. "Nothing much has changed, Vic," I said. She lit up. "Nope, still the best burgers in town." She grabbed my hand and pulled me. "Come on, you should say hi to Ron. He's a little busy, but he'll be glad to see you." Sure enough, Ron was in the kitchen. His white shirt and faded jeans somehow spotless amid the grease and smoke. He shouted orders like a sergeant and took a minute to notice us. He started to shout something to Victoria, then froze, his mouth dropping open. "Nikki?" I nodded. A big smile spread across his face, showing 2 missing teeth from a bar fight in Singapore. He quickly walked over, pushing aside 2 cooks. He hugged me so tightly that even a boa constrictor would have been jealous. "Damn it, son," he whispered. "It's so good to see you again." Then he, like Victoria, let me go and looked me up and down. "You look like crap," he said. "Too thin. When was the last time you slept?" I tried to laugh it off. "California. Way of life, Dad. Too many salads, not enough steaks." He laughed a deep belly laugh. "Damn weaklings eating crap that's not fit for humans. We'll fix you up in no time," he said. "Right, dear?" Victoria nodded, patting my forearm and leading me to a small table at the back. "What's your surprise?" I asked. She nodded toward the waitresses, and I turned around. Some tall redhead with a great figure was filling a tray with soda. My eyes widened when I realized who it was. "This?" "That's right, Nikki," she said. "She came back a few months ago." I said nothing but gratitude. When Victoria left me at the table to look after other customers, I recognized most of the people in the dining room. It was nice to see people I went to school with, trying to feed their kids between bites of their food. The whole place looked like any other thriving diner in Middle America, with everyone happy after a long day and pleased to be eating good food with friends and family. Someone cleared their throat next to me, and I turned to see the most beautiful blue eyes ever. Amy Standish herself, and she had changed very little in the last 10 years. The same long, thick red hair, high cheekbones, and a tiny dimple in her chin. "Hey, Amy," I muttered. "Hi." She looked around the room at the other tables before turning back to me. "Victoria said you already ordered a burger, so I just need to know what you'll be drinking." No smile, no recognition, nothing. Just impatience to take my order. "Come back with it and continue serving other tables, please," I said, holding up the nearly empty bottle of Miller Lite. She nodded, wrote it down, and left. I watched her leave, then watched her return with a fresh beer and take away the empty one. Then she set down the bottles of ketchup and mustard. "The burger will be ready in a minute," she said, and left again. Amy Standish, my unrequited high school crush. She was in my class, and I tried for a long time to get her attention. She never noticed me. When I finally asked her to the homecoming dance, she looked at me like I was crazy. Don't get me wrong. It's not like she was a snob or anything. We had enough of those in school. The ones who only cared about the quarterback, the track stars, and the wrestling champs. An ordinary person like me had no chance of being noticed. Despite my background and my father's appearance on The Tonight Show, No, Amy wasn't one of them. She was the class brain, a valedictorian who kept herself aloof. Sometimes she chatted with a group of other smart kids, probably discussing some geometry problem or chemical reaction. But more often, she just walked to and from class, with occasional stops at her locker, rarely acknowledging anyone around her. In our senior year, I was working as a cook at the hitching rail when she got a job as a waitress. I watched her run between tables, the kitchen, and the waitress stand during breaks. She rarely said anything to anyone unless she had to clarify an order or answer a direct question. She often had a faint smile, nodded a lot, then hurried away, noticing my interest. One evening, Ron told me, "Nothing ventured, nothing gained." This, of course, led to a no for the homecoming dance, and I went back to Ron to tell him. He simply nodded and left without saying a word. Thinking he found me as pathetic as Amy made me feel, I put it out of my mind. But a week later, Ron came up to me as I stood at the kitchen door, looking at Amy. "Victoria says she's shy," he said. "That's why you hardly ever hear her speak. Her parents forced her to get this job to get over it. Her shyness, that is, and Vic thinks she's starting to open up." I nodded. At this rate, I can't avoid retirement before having a full conversation with her. But it never happened. 10 months later, just before we both left for college, she finally spoke to me. "Hi, Nick." It was the first and last time she said my name, and I still remember the joy I felt knowing she knew my name. Even years later, I sometimes remember her smile when she spoke to me that one time. My heart still skips a beat at the memory. "So what about Amy?" I asked Jimmy Schultz. We were sitting at a bar, drinking beer and talking about school. Jimmy had been a star runner in high school and now sold insurance in Grand City, working out of his father's office on Main Street. "Still have a crush on her," he said without waiting for an answer. He turned and looked at her. "Yes. Who wouldn't?" We both stared at her for a minute before Jimmy spoke again. She was tall, about 5'8", with long legs, slightly flared hips, a flat stomach, and small breasts. Overall, a very attractive woman. "Met someone in college," he said. "An engineer, I think. I only met him once. They had lunch here about 3 years ago. He was as quiet as her, maybe more so. He didn't talk to anyone. They got married right out of college," Jimmy continued. "They had a little boy. They lived somewhere in New York. She taught and he did engineering. Then about a year ago, she moved back to town with the boy. The wedding ring disappeared and so did Albert. There were rumors he left with a male colleague, if you know what I mean." He looked at me when he said this, but I didn't react. "I guess it doesn't surprise you much since you live in California now," Jimmy said mockingly. "So what does she do now?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation back. Jimmy laughed. "She's an English teacher at the school and works here on Thursdays and Fridays. Her parents watch the boy." "Is she dating anyone?" I asked. "Whoa, man," Jimmy said, turning to look at me. "You're married to one of the sweetest girls in the world. Save some for the rest of us, okay?" I smiled, which seemed to reassure him. He turned again and looked at Amy. "No, she's not dating anyone. God knows we've all tried. Hell, she's turned me down more times than I can count." "Then why do you keep trying?" I asked. "Just trying to wear her out." He sighed. We both finished our beers and I went to the bar for more. "There have never been, nor will there be, waitresses in Grand City, Illinois," I said, placing a new bottle in front of Jimmy. "Of course," he said, finishing his last bottle before grabbing another. "Constantly. Where does he live now?" "On Foster Road," said Jimmy, "a nice spot just north of the Jenkins farm." "What is he doing now?" Jimmy looked at me with disbelief. "Jesus, Nick, when was the last time you spoke to him?" I avoided his gaze. 6 years ago at the Grammys, we had a couple of beers after we won Song of the Year." Jimmy put his bottle down and stared at me. "What the hell? You two were inseparable in school. Are you telling me you haven't seen him in 6 years?" I nodded. "It's just, I don't know. He didn't have much to say last time," I explained. "Then we were so busy, you know, life and all that." He nodded, but his eyes said he couldn't believe it. "Well," said Jimmy, "the royalties he got covered him. Nothing fancy, but he has a nice house now. He's married." My raised eyebrows showed surprise. Jimmy grinned. "Jenny Layden. They have 2 little girls. Both look just like her. He teaches English at school. He and Amy are good friends. You always see them chatting when he's here." "So, he comes here sometimes?" I asked, looking around to see if Teddy was there. He wasn't. Jimmy's head jerked toward the poster on the wall. It read, "Mustang Ranch, Friday, July 17th. Live performance from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Teddy's face was in the center of the band photo. I laughed. "That damn bastard," I said. "He left Leadfoot because he didn't want to do it, and now he plays in a bar band in his spare time." Jimmy shrugged. "Maybe he's happier this way." It took me a minute to realize Jimmy was right. Teddy never wanted fame and the problems that come with it. No, Teddy just wanted to teach and maybe play music for fun. Then I remembered our last time together, drinking beer at Spago, shouting over the noisy crowd, trying to hear each other. Teddy, nervous in the crowd of people trying to be seen. He was like a fish out of water. He just wanted a normal life, like his parents, with a wife, children, and a satisfying job, with a little music on the side for fun. He knew what fame would bring, and he didn't want it. Teddy had everything better than me. Much better. "You look like you've been hit in the face with a shovel," Walter said as we walked home in the dark. "I just have a lot on my mind," I replied. "Don't tell me. Jimmy Schultz finally said something smart?" "No," I replied. "It's just common sense that I seem to have lost lately." I turned halfway down the street and looked at Walter. "Mom was from here," I said. "Of course," Walter agreed. "Tyler is 15 miles from here. And you were from Chicago?" "Oak Brook," he corrected. "Almost the same," I said. "Chicago, a rich suburb. No difference. But she was from here. Her parents were ordinary people from a small town, a pharmacist and a housewife." He nodded. "And what about your father? He was an editor at the Tribune, and your mother was a society lady from old meat processing money, right?" "That's true," he defended himself. "But what's your point?" I walked a bit before answering. "My point is that you two were doomed from the start. She was a small-town girl from a typical family. You were a big-city guy from a rich, influential family. You spent your life among famous and glamorous people. Mom hung out in soda bars and kissed boys in movie theaters." He nodded, understanding. "So we were doomed from the start?" "Well," I said, "your behavior didn't help. Having little in common is bad, and you made things worse by sleeping with every actress you saw." "Did Jimmy come up with all this?" Walter asked. "No, I did. Jimmy said something that made me think, so what did he say?" "It's not what he said. The point is, I didn't think of it first. Teddy had what he wanted, a small-town dream. At first I thought it was a small dream, but then I realized I was seeing it from a Hollywood perspective. Teddy has the royalty money, but he's happier with his family, his career, and his little bar band than I am with my superstar wife, my mansion, and my money. My best friend is a ghost I didn't even like when he was alive." Walter watched me closely. Then an offended smile appeared on his face, and before I could apologize, he was gone. He did this sometimes, disappearing when I said something that made him angry. But he always came back, his feathers ruffled and looking for an apology, which I usually gave. Walter first appeared to me after the Dallas show, about a year after his death. I thought someone had put something in my water bottle when I turned around and saw him sitting there, looking at me with that same humor in his eyes. During the band's early years of fame, I had taken illegal substances, but this was different. The conversation that followed was too rational. For the next 3 months, I talked to Walter when no one else was around. This was the only time he appeared, when I was alone. Then it got too creepy for me. Despite Walter's protests that I wasn't going crazy, I decided to see a doctor. The first few doctors, thinking all this was tabloid nonsense, told me to stop using illegal substances and alcohol. When I told them that was in the past, they said it was probably residual effects. Still unhappy and still seeing Walter, I finally found someone to run a full battery of tests. Thank God I wasn't schizophrenic. But Dr. Solomon still couldn't find anything wrong with me. 4 months of therapy followed. I explained to Tara that I needed someone to help me cope with stress. For her, therapy was normal among the acting crowd, a sign of true sensitivity and self-realization. At the end of the therapy, Dr. Solomon closed his notebook, left the table, and sat next to me. "I'll tell you what I think," he said with a satisfied smile. "What's that, doctor?" "I think you're being visited by a ghost. It may not be a real ghost, but a ghost from your past. You need to talk to someone who understands you. This is how your mind deals with everything. Your best friends are your bandmates, but they put extra pressure on you, so they're not part of the solution. They're part of the problem you need to deal with. So who knows you best and can help you get through all of this? Walter, I suggested. He smiled and shook his head. No, Nick, it's you. You are the one who can best help you deal with your problems. So, Walter is... I just see things? He shrugged. It's a rare case, and images rarely last this long. However, I think you have unresolved issues with your father. You always wanted him to help you when you were growing up. Now, when you really need help, he's gone. So yes, I think your subconscious creates an image to work through your problems. Since your father was the one you wanted to see in this role, I think your subconscious created Walter. I nodded. It made sense. Should I be worried? Dr. Solomon smiled. No, Nick. Honestly, although it's unusual, I think it's a healthy way to deal with the pressure. When this all blows over, you'll see Walter less and less, and you'll just have these conversations in your head without images. I felt better until Walter showed up the next day while I was struggling with some lyrics. Have you ever heard such nonsense in your life? He said. I'm not listening to myself right now, I said, not taking my eyes off the lyrics. I'm not, you idiot. I am your father, and I will prove it to you. I looked up, skepticism written all over my face. I'll tell you something you don't know, he said, sharing a secret no one else knew. I laughed, making Dr. Solomon look foolish. Walter's last manuscript, hidden in a fake log at a cabin I had never visited, was published 8 months later with great fanfare. After a few beers, good conversation, a late-night walk, and a bacon cheeseburger the size of a bear's rear, I had a great night's sleep. I woke up Friday morning to the sun high in the sky and silence in the house. The clock next to my bed showed almost 9. I lazily stretched, a smile on my face. Damn it, I thought, looking at my joyful face in the mirror while shaving. Where have you been? Where has the happy Nick been hiding? Even 23 voicemails on my cell phone, which I deleted at once, couldn't wipe the smile off my face. Walking down the steps, I grabbed yogurt from the fridge and started eating. Then I brewed fresh coffee. The only bad thing about Grand City was the lack of a Starbucks. While it brewed, I went out to the driveway and fetched my guitars and rocking chair from the Escalade. For the first time in a year, I was in the mood to write music, and I wasn't going to let this opportunity pass. I wrote for almost 11 hours. Bob came over for lunch, but I refused to eat and kept working. I was in a zone I hadn't been in for years, filling half my notebook with interesting chord progressions and notes on tempo, melody, and other ideas. I read somewhere about how Lennon and McCartney wrote Hard Day's Night. Ringo suggested the film's title based on one of his lines, and the director liked it. But there was no song with that name. No problem. Lennon and McCartney wrote the entire song that night. That's the zone, and it comes and goes, unless you're Lennon and McCartney, who stayed in the zone for decades. When Mom and Bob went fishing, I gave up and finished the main melody of the second song. It wasn't quite ready yet, but close. My energy was running low, so I stopped, ate, and decided to check out Teddy's group. It took me longer to get ready than I thought, and the walk from my mom's house to the bar took another 20 minutes. By the time I got to the hitching rail, the music had already started. The bar was full of people, and the dining room was packed. The band, hidden in the back corner, was performing Walking the Floor Over You by Ernest Tubb. They did a great job, giving the classic song an upbeat vibe, driven by a catchy piano line. "You're back," Victoria whispered in my ear from behind. I turned around, smiled at her, and looked into the dining room. "How long is the wait for a table, honey?" She laughed, took my hand, and led me to the kitchen. "Guess who's back?" Victoria shouted, pushing the door open. I saw Ron and Amy talking, but their conversation stopped, and Amy turned away as I peeked out from behind Victoria. "Ron, make Nikki something to eat, okay?" He smiled. "Too many people?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. I ordered a grilled chicken breast sandwich and some fruit. "California wimps," he muttered. "They ruined a normal guy." I chuckled and turned to Amy. When our eyes met, she blushed and turned away again. "Amy, honey," Victoria said, "could you get Nick a beer from the bar?" Amy nodded and muttered, "Of course." then ran out the door past me, leaving behind the scent of shampoo and citrus perfume. My eyes followed her to the bar. "I told you so," Victoria said. I turned around. They both looked at me, and now it was my turn to stutter. "She looks pretty good, doesn't she?" Victoria beamed, and Ron raised his eyes to the sky, pleading, "Please help him have courage." I laughed. I ate my sandwich and fruit, drank my beer in the kitchen, and chatted with Ron while he and the boys sent out last-minute orders and cleaned up. After I finished eating, I left them to finish cleaning. Returning to the bar, I noticed Jimmy Schultz talking to Jenny Cooper, nee Lawden. She hadn't changed much, maybe gained a bit of weight and had a few lines on her face. Otherwise, she looked the same as when we went to prom. She swayed to the music, her eyes fixed on the stage, catching what Jimmy was saying. "Shall I buy you a drink?" I asked, approaching them as the song ended. "Nick!" Jenny screamed, jumping and hugging me. "Jimmy said you're back." I looked at him over her shoulder, and he nodded in greeting. "I'll buy you a drink," he said. "You'll be busy." "When did you hear?" I asked when she finally let go. "While Teddy and the guys were setting up," she said, her eyes turning to the stage. Teddy looked at us with a mocking expression. He then raised his chin in greeting, and I raised my beer in response. "Nick," Jenny said, "he wants to know if you'll play a song with them. 3 of the guys are in college, and he says it will make their lives complete if they get to play on stage with you. Will you do this for old time's sake?" She had those pleading puppy dog eyes I couldn't refuse. "Sure, Jenny," I said, kissing her forehead. "Tell him I'll play something with them when they're ready." Before I could react, she twisted away from my embrace. "He said he'd do it, Teddy." Suddenly, all eyes in the place turned to me. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," said Teddy, "you're in for a real treat tonight." I looked around and noticed the surprised looks from those who knew who I was, which seemed to be the majority. "It's true," Teddy continued. "The old wind is back in town, and he's here tonight." A few people whistled and a couple of women clapped. "I was told this guy plays the guitar adequately," Teddy said, and I could hear the humor in his voice. "Hell, some people even think he can sing, though I'm not one of them." The crowd laughed and clapped. "So maybe if we ask him nicely, we can convince him to come up here and do a couple of songs." Teddy waved his hand over his guitar and towards me. "What do you think, folks? Anyone want to see if Nick Haaland can still play the old songs?" The crowd erupted, and I almost burst into tears. It had been 10 years since I played for these people, and 9 years since I played for less than 15,000 fans. At that moment, I would have given up every arena in the country for one more standing ovation from these folks I had known my entire life. "Now look at this," Teddy joked as I made my way to the stage, wiping a tear from my eye. "He's nervous." I jumped onto the small, crowded stage and leaned toward Teddy. "You bastard," I said. Then I hugged him through the guitar, and he hugged me back with such energy that my heart almost burst with shame. "Why haven't we talked for so long?" The crowd started chanting for us to play something, and Teddy whispered, "Maybe we should stop this little love fest before we get tarred and feathered." I laughed, stopped hugging, and picked up the acoustic guitar, looking for a patch cord. The bassist rushed to my aid. "Here you go, Mr. Haaland," he said, looking nervous and excited. I smiled. "Call me Nick," I said, connecting the cable to the guitar. "Is the mixing console set up for this?" I asked Teddy. He nodded. "When I heard you were back, I figured we better be ready for another instrument. So what do you want to play?" I smiled. "Two angels." Teddy's smile stretched from ear to ear. "You heard it, boys," he shouted, then turned to me. "The piano is leading us on this one." And so it began. Soon my rhythm joined with the drums, bass, and Teddy's sad slide guitar line. When the vocals started, Teddy and I shared the mic, keeping our guitars away from each other. We then continued with an extended instrumental performance that showcased the guy's talent on the piano superbly. By the end of the song, the crowd was screaming for more. It felt like we were never apart. Teddy was better on lead guitar, and his voice had more range than I remembered. Suddenly, I wanted to see how good these guys were, to see if this was Teddy's hobby or still his passion. When the applause died down, Teddy waved his hand at me. "Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Nick Haaland for coming up here." I bowed in response to the applause, then turned to Teddy. "I'd like to stay here for a while if you don't mind," I whispered. Teddy gave me a lazy smile. "I think I'd like that." He turned to the rest of the group. "Think you can keep up with us?" They all nodded, and Teddy turned to me. "So what's next?" We performed a lesser-known Bob Dylan song, Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts. It was a 9-minute number, and we really improvised the accompaniment. The drummer, bassist, and I kept the basic rhythm going, but Teddy improvised some neat melodies throughout the song, and the piano guy was outstanding. By the time we finished, people were streaming in the door, and there was no room in the dance area. I stayed on stage until the end of the show, sat with the band during breaks, and signed autographs for everyone. We played mostly country rock covers like Graham Parsons' Return of the Grievous Angel, Steve Earle's Angel is the Devil, a lot of John Hyatt and Jayhawk songs, and the Rolling Stones' Dead Flowers. We only played 2 Leadfoot songs, both of which Teddy and I wrote together. By the last hour of the show, word had spread, and cars were parked along the street for blocks. No one could move inside. At 1:20, we finished with the tight, sweet 4-part harmonies of the Poco classic Keep On Trying. The crowd went crazy, and we would have played longer, but that song pretty much killed our voices for the night. I helped the group dismantle the equipment and move it into their cars and vans, accepting free beer from the crowd and lots of pats on the back. By the time we finished, the bar was closed, and the bartenders were sweeping up and wiping down tables. A few of us sat around the bar, drinking the last of the beers in the dim light. There was Ron, Victoria, Jenny, Teddy, the rest of the band, and me. Ron was telling us that we needed to do this more often so he could retire one day. Then I heard a quiet but clear voice behind me. Now I think I understand what all the fuss is about. I turned around. It was Amy, and her eyes met mine and held them. I was speechless. "Cat got your tongue, Nick?" Jenny teased. I heard a few chuckles, but I was speechless. My eyes were glued to hers, and she didn't look away. Lost in those deep blue eyes, her face showed no emotion, but she didn't break eye contact. We just stared at each other for what seemed like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. "California imbecile," Ron muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. This broke the moment, and Amy smiled briefly before saying, "Anyway, you were really good up there." She looked at Teddy and added, "Both of you were good." She was out the door before I could answer. "Still have feelings for her, don't you?" Teddy asked. "Of course," Victoria replied. "Just too afraid to do anything," Ron said. "California ruined it." I just smiled. "You know," I said, "that's the longest thing she's ever said to me." "Yes," said Teddy, "but let me tell you, when you get to know her, she's one hell of a talker. It just takes time." "But you shouldn't," Jenny said. "You're married, and we don't want her to get hurt," Teddy finished. "She's been through a lot." Victoria looked at me. I tried to hide it, but I flinched a little at the mention of my marriage, and Victoria noticed. She whispered something to her husband, and Ron nodded. He probably already guessed I was in trouble, and this just confirmed it. "What are you doing tomorrow?" Teddy asked. I shrugged. "I'll probably just write," I said. "I'm in the zone, and I don't want to lose it." He nodded, understanding. He then turned to Jenny and raised his eyebrows. She saw the look and turned to me. "We want you to come to our barbecue," she said. "About an hour from now. We've invited about 30 people, and the band will rehearse for their entertainment. Why don't you grab your guitar and join in?" When I didn't answer right away, Jenny leaned over and put her hand on mine. "We really want you to meet our girls," she said, "and Amy will be there too, with her little boy." That sold me, and I smiled. "I'll be there," I said. As Teddy stood up to leave, he said, "You'll benefit from spending time with normal people for a change. Enjoy a casual gathering in a small town." If only we knew then how wrong Teddy was. The next day would be far from typical in Grand City, Illinois. I slept until almost 11 on Saturday. I would have slept even longer and probably would have been late for the barbecue if not for my mother's voice, which sounded loud and clear above the noise outside. "Get off my lawn!" she screamed. "If you damage these roses, I will skin you." I lay there frozen. I'd been in this situation a million times and knew what that noise was. A quick glance out the window confirmed my suspicions. There he is! The lookout operator shouted, and I dove back. My body acted automatically. I quickly shaved, showered, brushed my teeth, and dressed in something casual but stylish. Appear before the press looking like anyone else, and they will crucify you. 15 minutes later, I walked down the stairs, out the door, and stood next to my mother on the porch. "I can handle this," I said, smiling at her before turning to face the dozen reporters and cameramen. "Okay, ladies and gentlemen," I said, "get off the lawn and onto the sidewalk, then come over here and we'll do this interview, okay?" They obeyed. Just as I knew they would. If they want an interview, they'll have to play by the rules. Once they were all gathered on the porch, I laid down the rules. "Okay, let's start with the ladies. Then we'll go from left to right. Does that sound fair?" They agreed. Some young beauty from Entertainment Tonight began. "Nick, the videos of you and Teddy Cooper on YouTube have over 10 million views, and they were posted less than 8 hours ago. Are you going to leave Leadfoot and start a new band?" Damn internet age, I thought. However, I kept a smile on my face and answered. "I have no plans to leave Leadfoot," I said. "I came home to visit family and friends, and Teddy asked me to join them on stage last night. As you know, we are old friends, and he was one of the founders of Leadfoot. I couldn't refuse, and we had a lot of fun together." "But you left in the middle of recording negotiations," said another lady, this time in her 30s, with her hair held in place by a bottle of hairspray and wearing an immaculate dark blue suit on this hot Saturday morning. "There are rumors in Los Angeles that you are tired and are going to leave, that you do not want to sign a new contract for Leadfoot. Is there any truth to this?" I shook my head. "No. We have a very capable manager, Ethan Rose, who is in charge of negotiations. I just needed a break, and here I am." "What about the rumors that you and Tara Boyd are having problems?" said one of the men. "And that she's now dating your bandmate Carl Simpson?" said another immediately after him. I smiled and tried to avoid the questions. "Ladies and gentlemen, Tara and I love each other very much," I said. "She's busy preparing for the new season, and I just decided it was the right time for a break. That's all." They spent another half hour trying to get me to clarify my answers, but I managed to dodge everyone and stick to the main story. Seeing that it wouldn't get them anywhere, they all thanked me for my time, apologized to Mom for the damage done, and headed back to their vans to edit the interviews for the evening news. I apologized to my mom, then told her I was going to Teddy's for a barbecue. She said she was invited a few weeks ago, and she and Bob would probably stop by when he got home from work. I then packed my 2 guitars back into the Escalade and headed out early. I took the long way down the back roads to make sure none of the journalists were following me and parked in Teddy's driveway at 11:30. "This way," I heard Teddy say as I got out of the car. I followed the sound of his voice and the smell of barbecued pork around the house. He stood on the terrace, smoking pork shoulders with a big smoker right next to him. 3 kids, 2 girls, and a boy were splashing in the shallow end of the pool. "Quite an exciting morning," he said, looking at me while sipping his iced tea. "Were they here too?" I asked. He nodded, not too happy with how things had gone. "What did you do?" He smiled. "Told them to get off my property or I'd call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." I laughed. I wish I could do that. I grabbed a can of Diet Pepsi from a nearby cooler and sat down on one of the lounge chairs. He topped the pork with something before closing the lid and sitting down next to me. We spent the next 20 minutes chatting about all sorts of things and watching the kids in the pool. I started by apologizing for not keeping in touch over the last 6 years. He shrugged it off, understanding. "That's why I never wanted this life," he said. "But you did, and I know how much it took from you." That was his last word on the matter. The apology seemed accepted. He then told me who else was married, who had kids, and who worked where. Then he got serious. "Why did you come back?" he asked. I didn't answer, preferring to look at the grove of oak trees in the distance. "You can talk to me, you know," he said, his voice lowering. I didn't say anything for a minute, then turned and looked at him. "Teddy, are you happy?" He gave me a questioning look. "Of course I'm happy. And you?" I sighed. "I don't think so," I said. "This isn't what I expected, but I'm starting to realize it's not what I want anymore." "Then get out," he said. "Just take it and go." Walter had said the same thing, but it had much more impact coming from Teddy. "It's not that simple," I objected. I have obligations. Everyone in the band is counting on me, and I have a wife. She'll never move here. He nodded. Is the rumor true? My eyes narrowed. Which rumor? I asked. One of the reporters said that Carl was sleeping with Tara. He saw the look on my face and nodded. He tried it with Jenny once, Teddy said. A few years ago, when his parents had a big anniversary party, he was in town for a few days. He tried to get Jenny to join him in his hotel room. And? I asked. She threw a drink in his face, cooled his ardor quickly. I laughed. Well, I said, Tara seems to have lit the fire. So what are you going to do? I don't know, Teddy. I love her. I like being around her. She's cheerful, funny, sweet, and charming. She's great in bed. I feel comfortable with her. The thought of change scares me. Think about it, Teddy said, getting up and walking into the house. He returned with 2 bottles of beer and handed me one. Have you talked to her about this yet? He asked. I shook my head. I tried, but she doesn't want to talk about it unless we're face to face, and I'm afraid to do it face to face now. I'm afraid I'll just take her back and it will happen again. He nodded. Well, let me offer my 2 cents. You have to find out why she did it. Don't worry about her doing it. That's in the past. It's important to understand why, to know if it will happen again. He smiled widely. Unless, of course, California has changed you so much that you don't mind sharing. I've heard famous people enjoy that. I laughed. No, it hasn't changed me that much. Some people are just wired that way. Guys and girls, they don't see it as a big deal. It's how they were raised or the way they are. If you figure out why, you'll know whether it was a one-time mistake or the first of many. Then you need to ask yourself if you can live with it if it happens again. What if it happens in 5 years? Could you give her another chance, always wondering when it will happen again? I nodded, considering his words. Walter didn't express himself so clearly. But on the other hand, he never loved her from the start. So, could you forgive Jenny if you caught her in a situation like this? I asked. I'd like to think so, he replied. But it all depends on the reason. He leaned forward. Let me tell you something. I won't name names, but let's say you know these people. One caught his partner in bed with someone else. It was the first time and she told the truth about it. But the main reason he left her was that she didn't love him anymore. He looked me straight in the eyes. Some people can't bear the thought of being alone, so they find someone new before letting go of the old one. It happens often. That's what she did. She found someone she thought could replace him and tested it. I thought about it. So, if Tara just found herself in a bad situation and didn't fight temptation hard enough, like if you were going through a rough patch, he suggested, are you saying I should just forget about it? No, I'm saying you should consider it when making decisions about your marriage. He leaned back. Nick, everyone is different. But if you truly love her and you're sure she loves you, maybe you should try to fix the lawnmower before you throw it away and buy a new one. Unless, of course, the lawnmower is too broken to be fixed. I nodded, deep in thought. Did you just compare me to a lawnmower? Jenny shouted from the kitchen window. No, honey, Teddy shouted back. Then he leaned close to me. Only you can make these decisions, Nick. You know this, don't you? Only you will truly know if you can save a good marriage after this. All I can say is that crap, no matter how wrong it is, and it really is wrong, happens to marriages all the time, and people survive it and stay happily married for 50 years. I nodded, and we moved the conversation to other topics as people began to gather. About 15 minutes into our conversation, it was my turn to get a beer. I walked into the kitchen and froze when I saw Jenny and Amy whispering at the sink as they stirred large bowls of coleslaw and potato salad. They froze when they noticed me, and Jenny tried to hide it by giving me a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek. Amy couldn't look me in the eyes and could barely mutter a hello in response to my greeting. They were talking about me, and I was afraid they had heard too much from my conversation with Teddy. Dragging my hand full of beer and soda back out onto the deck, I handed them out to everyone. Is there something wrong? Teddy asked. I shook my head and tried to get back to my conversation with Will, the pianist from last night, about who was better, Warren Zevon or Ray Charles. After much discussion and too much input from the others, we agreed it was like comparing apples to oranges. Even though Ray Charles was by far the better jazz player and Warren Zevon the more versatile composer, we couldn't decide. With about 35 people gathered, we decided it was a good time to play some music. Better finish the fun before we get too drunk. Everyone gathered in the hangar, which was finished enough to allow for good sound on a small scale. I brought my guitars from the car and plugged them into spare amps that were sitting around. About 45 minutes in, Teddy begged me to perform Time to Start Again, a ballad from our first album and one of the first songs Teddy and I ever wrote. It was a song about a painful breakup, and the singer tried to convince a rejected lover to give love another chance. The best arrangement was just the lead vocal with minimal harmonies, accompanied by fingerstyle guitar and a soft piano line. I agreed and sat on a stool behind the lead vocal microphone, starting the guitar line and waiting for the piano to come in. As the piano began to play, I looked around the crowd and saw Amy standing behind me, slowly swaying to the music. Her eyes were fixed on me and mine met hers. They stayed locked throughout the song. For some reason, and I knew exactly why, I poured my whole soul into it, turning an already sad song into a real emotional journey. By the end, when the spurned lover replies that he just doesn't know if he's ready and the instruments fall silent, you could have heard a pin drop. Then, I felt a punch on my arm and looked away from Amy. Everyone in the room was looking at us back and forth. Amy noticed it too and blushed while I tried to focus on something else. "I think we should take a little break, don't you guys?" Will, the pianist, suggested. Everyone agreed, and people began to leave the hangar in search of cold beer and lemonade. A minute later, it was just Amy and I in the barn, me still on the stool and her still standing 30 feet away. "I heard the whole conversation," she said after a minute. "You and Teddy on the terrace." I tried to smile, but I couldn't. "Yeah, sorry," she said. "I know what it's like, and I have an idea of what you're going through." "Thank you," I finally managed to say. What was wrong with me? She had spoken to me more in the last 24 hours than in the previous 24 years combined. In response, I could only muster 3 syllables. "Did you like the song?" She sobbed several times. "It was wonderful," she said, then tried to laugh. "I swear, Nick, if I leave here now, I'll burst into tears." I smiled, then moved the capo down the neck of the guitar to the 2nd fret and started playing another tune. "Maybe this will cheer you up," I said. I started singing If I Only Had a Brain from The Wizard of Oz. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she began to wipe them away and laugh, her lips sometimes syncing with the lyrics. Towards the end, I heard her faint soprano voice join in the chorus. When I finished, I patted the seat of the stool next to me. "Come on," I urged. "Let's sing one more." She looked over her shoulder, unsure. "Don't make me ask again," I said, perhaps too seriously. Eventually, she sat next to me. "So it was your little boy at the pool when I arrived?" I began, fingering the notes as I spoke. Her face lit up. "Brighton," she said. "Lovely," I remarked. "Thank you." I played with the guitar for a few minutes, glancing at her and smiling when our eyes met. She was less shy, I noticed, and I decided to just say what Ron had been pushing me to say for a decade. I stopped playing and folded my hands over the guitar. "I've wanted to tell you something for a long time," I began. Her face became serious. Perhaps fear flashed in her eyes. "I don't want this to sound wrong, and I don't really—" "Me too," she chimed in, placing her hand on my forearm and gently stroking it. "Since you invited me to the homecoming party." The look of utter disbelief on my face was hard to hide, and she looked down at her lap as she continued. "I spoiled it all. I wanted you to invite me, but when you did, I was horrified. I wanted you to try again, but I knew you wouldn't." She looked into my eyes again. "I wondered all these years, especially the last 3 years after my divorce, how different things would have been if I had just been able to say yes." I still had that same expression on my face, and it was probably getting more and more incredible. "Say something, Nick," Amy said. "Well, that's it," I whispered. "I didn't expect this." She giggled, then laughed, and soon we were both laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. Then she looked at me seriously. "But it won't do any of us any good right now," she said. "I'm not going to seduce you, and you better not seduce me." You're married, Nick, and I'm not going to be the other woman in this little drama." I tilted my head and pressed my cheek against her palm, enjoying her smooth, cool skin. "After 10 years, I'm just glad we can finally talk." "Amy, I'm not looking to force my problems on anyone," I said, looking into her eyes, "especially someone I care so much about." "Okay," she nodded. "And don't think I'll be here if you decide to leave her," Amy continued. "I want to be clear, Nick. I like you, but we don't know each other anymore. So you better not think you can just get a divorce and jump straight into my bed, okay? This is between you and your wife. Teddy is right. You have to decide what you want. If you think you want me more than her, don't count on it. Got it?" I nodded, feeling a bit sad. Her words brought me back to reality. There was no point in moving from one complicated situation to another with someone I barely knew. Then we heard a helicopter land nearby. Amy and I stood at the hangar door and watched the helicopter's blades stop a few hundred feet away. The side door opened, and I saw Teddy's little girls running with their arms open, shouting, "Uncle Ethan!" I was surprised they knew Ethan well enough to call him Uncle. I felt a pang of guilt for not being closer to Teddy. Ethan jumped out of the helicopter and turned to help an older man follow him out. I cursed quietly when I recognized Monty Evans, the Columbia executive in charge of negotiating our contract. "Do you know him?" Amy asked. "Yes," I replied. I walked toward them, soon joined by Teddy. Teddy seemed happy to see Ethan, but puzzled by the obvious anger on my face. "Hey guys," Ethan said with a big smile. "Do you mind if we join your party?" "Of course not," Teddy replied, shaking Ethan's hand and introducing himself to Monty. I ignored both outstretched hands, glaring at them. "Come on, Nick," Ethan pleaded. "Don't be like that." "What are you doing here?" I asked Monty. "Well, maybe this isn't the most traditional way of doing things," he hesitated. "But I'm on vacation," I replied sharply. Turning to Ethan, I continued, "I thought I made that clear." Ethan ignored my anger and kept smiling. "It happened this way," he said. He walked toward the house, saying, "The video of you guys last night went viral on the internet." "Sorry, Nick," Monty said. "You too, Mr. Cooper. This is becoming very popular and we can't wait any longer. Things will get much worse. Could you please get the rest of the guys from the band that played last night?" "They're up by the house," Teddy said, his voice growing weary. "Could you give us 15 minutes of your time here?" Ethan asked. "With those guys who played last night?" "No," I said. "We're having a barbecue. This isn't the time or place." "Nick, will you please listen to me this time?" Monty begged. "You don't understand. Things looked bad last night, but everything changed when these videos started appearing online this morning." Teddy smiled. "How so?" Ethan's smile was mysterious. "Let's wait until everyone is here, okay?" So we walked the remaining distance in silence. I directed Ethan and Monty to the hangar while Teddy gathered Will, bassist Rob, and drummer Jimbo. I watched as they entered the room. Everyone except Teddy was nervous and excited. Will was tall and thin, with unkempt brown hair and classic pianist hands, long fingers. Rob had short blonde hair, clear blue eyes, muscular arms, broad shoulders, and stocky legs. Jimbo was about 5'10", neither thin nor fat, with short brown hair and an open face that couldn't hide his emotions. All three of them were nervous when Teddy introduced them. Surprisingly, Teddy seemed intrigued. I had an idea where this was going, and I'm sure Teddy knew too. I expected him to be impatient, but he had a quiet smile that didn't give anything away. "Guys," Monty began, "I'm sure you're aware that your show last night generated a lot of interest." Their smiling glances showed they knew about their success on YouTube. "That's good," Monty continued, "but my boss got a call this morning and now he's interested too." "Come on," Ethan urged. "Tell them who called." Monty looked at all three of them, then his eyes fell on Teddy. "Bob Dylan, if you can believe it. He liked your version of Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts. He said he had never heard it performed better. The singing, the arranging, everything." Teddy nodded as if this was normal. I didn't bother hiding my surprise, and I appreciated the high fives between Will and Jimbo, who were obviously delighted. "I don't care if you like Dylan's music or not. He is a certified genius in the industry. When Bob Dylan speaks, which is rare, record executives listen. especially after he reinvented himself about a decade ago and proved his ability to create again. I'm not saying we liked everything we saw and heard, Monty continued. To be honest, I spent half the morning watching other videos from the show. They weren't of the best quality. However, we want to see what you can do, if you don't mind. Teddy simply nodded. Now? Monty asked. Teddy looked at the guys, then at me. We all understood what this meant. My eyes settled on Ethan and stayed there. After a minute, he nodded. All of you? He asked. Teddy looked at me and shrugged, his smile starting to fade. I think I agree, he said, looking unsure now. Me too, I said. Teddy took a deep breath. Okay, he said. Guys, turn everything on again and I'll go gather everyone back here. Wait, Monty said. We would prefer to see you without any interruptions if you don't mind. Teddy ignored him, and Ethan and Monty both turned to me for help. Don't look at me, guys, I said. Maybe it's better to get used to it now if that's what you really want. So we did it. We played 4 more songs, 2 energetic tunes, 1 ballad, and 1 mid-tempo. Monty recorded everything on a portable video camera to show his bosses in Los Angeles. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was better than a cell phone video uploaded to YouTube. When we finished, Monty thanked us and declined the invitation to stay for the meal. Instead, he promised to call the next day, got back into the helicopter, and flew away. Ethan, on the other hand, stayed for the celebration. I was amazed and felt guilt for being away so long when I noticed that almost everyone knew Ethan by name an hour after the show. I helped Teddy remove the pork shoulders from the smoker. Are you really interested in this? I asked. He smiled. Let's talk away from prying eyes. We rested the pork shoulders under a huge aluminum foil tent. In the meantime, I made my rounds and chatted a bit with Mom, Dr. Bob, and Will, all of whom knew each other. Mom shocked me when she told me that she had helped Teddy recruit Will, Rob, and Jimbo from Chadwick College. It was easy, she said. I just asked the music teachers who was capable of what and brought them together with Teddy. He sorted everything out himself. Half an hour later, Teddy called me into the kitchen to help him tear the pork shoulders into sandwiches. He gave me 2 plastic tools he called bear claws and showed me how to use them. Then we each grabbed a shoulder and started tearing apart 50 pounds of pork. Teddy let me get comfortable before speaking. Okay, he said. The answer is yes. I am seriously considering it. I didn't say anything, not knowing what to say. After a few minutes, I noticed Teddy was no longer tearing meat, and I looked up. He was staring at me. Say something. Okay, I replied. Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? What you're tying your family into? He smiled his lazy smile. I know exactly what I'm getting myself into, he said. This has been planned for a long time, and we carefully prepared for this day. Now it was I who stopped, waiting for clarification. The explanation came with Ethan bursting through the kitchen door. He looked at us and said, Are you telling him everything now? Yes, said Teddy. It's better to end this now. What are you talking about? I said, feeling a surge of fear. Ethan ignored the question and rummaged through a drawer until he found another pair of bear claws. He then joined us and started tearing the pork. Not only did everyone seem to know Ethan, I realized, but Ethan Rose, the Jewish guy from Jersey, knew how to pull pork. It was a conspiracy. I now realized and went back to work, waiting for the explanation to come out. Ethan finally broke the silence. Honestly, he said, Leadfoot hasn't been at its best since the second album. You're a great composer, but all your best stuff was when you collaborated with Teddy. I nodded. He was right, of course. We'd been riding the wave of our initial popularity, still good enough to sell millions of albums and sell out hundreds of arenas. So 5 years ago, Ethan continued, maybe 10 months after the Grammys, when you all won everything, I flew to Teddy. I had already noticed a decline in my songwriting and wanted his opinion. He showed me all the things he was still writing. I looked up at this. I had no idea Teddy was still writing. We definitely didn't play any of that last night. Good enough for album filler, Ethan continued, but it wasn't a hit. You've always been the best songwriter, Nick, Teddy said. Ethan has been trying to get me to team up with you again for the last 5 years. So why not just call? I asked. We could cooperate. You could stay away from the rest. I was going to, Teddy said. About 1.5 years ago, I contacted Ethan and told him to reach out to you. but it was in the middle of the studio sessions for Cactus Rose, Ethan said, naming our latest album. All the songs had already been written and you were exhausted from the studio sessions. The timing wasn't right, and we were at the end of the recording contract. So why not wait a little and then tell me, I said. None of them met my eyes on this question, and I waited for an answer. After a minute, I put down my bear claws and placed my hands on the table, leaning toward it. "Admit it, guys," I said, more than a little angry. Teddy was the first to look up. "About 5 months ago, you gave Ethan the next batch of songs. You had just returned from an American tour and spent most of your time writing. He forwarded the songs to me for feedback, and I reviewed and rewrote most of them. I was pleasantly surprised by how good they were, but then I realized there was more to this. Ethan, the songs are better than I thought," I said. My smile faded, but Teddy never touched them. "Damn it, Ethan. I got the songs back about 2 months ago, just before negotiations began. They're better, much better, actually. Not quite ready, but close. So why don't we use them?" "Because Ethan found out about Carl and Tara about a week before he got my rewrites," Teddy said. I felt my anger rising. My jaw tensed, and my hands clenched into fists. "You knew about this for 2 months and didn't tell me?" I asked Ethan. Then I turned to Teddy. "And you? Did you know too? Just a few hours ago, you told me to find out why before making a decision. Did you know?" They looked at each other, then back at me. "My advice remains the same," Teddy said. "None of us know how long this has been going on, how many times they met, or why it happened in the first place." "But damn it, Teddy, you should have told me." I threw down the bear claws. "When, Nick? When should I have told you? You haven't talked to me in 6 years. Think about it. 6 damn years. You didn't even know I was married, did you?" His words hit me hard, mixing my anger with guilt. He was right. "I sent you a wedding invitation, Nick. You ignored it. Didn't even send a card. So when should I have told you? Or better yet, why should I even bother?" "Theodore Cooper!" Jenny shouted from behind the door. We all looked at her, and the look on her face was enough to strike fear into our hearts. "You have guests outside," she hissed. "I don't think they need to hear this nonsense. Is it true?" We all hung our heads, muttered apologies, and went back to tearing apart the pork. She turned around, slammed the door behind her, and soon we heard her cheerful voice telling everyone that it was just guys being guys. "I never saw the invitation, Teddy," I said. "I'm really sorry. I felt like crap since the first time I saw you. You were really good, and I have no right to count on that." "What I said still stands," he said. "You still have to find out more. If they only hooked up a few times and you can live with that reason. I'm not saying I would forgive her and try to keep it that way. However, I'm not you, and I think you really need to deal with this." I nodded. Then I looked at Ethan. "And you? Only money, right? You were afraid to tell me because you thought it would kill the band and your cash cow, right?" "No, Nick," he said. "It's not just about money. You're like a brother to me. You and Teddy are the only ones I've ever gotten along with. I just didn't want to see you on the street. You'll quit Leadfoot without a plan and, well, I didn't want you to disappear. Okay?" "And he told you everything?" Teddy asked. "No," I answered sharply. "I found them myself, Teddy." "You caught them because I finished negotiations 3 hours early," Ethan said. "Did you know they would be together?" He nodded. "I asked someone to keep an eye on Carl when he pulled up to your house. I got the message just as we started. Do you remember how angry I was at the beginning and walked out after finishing the meeting? Why didn't you just tell me?" "Would you believe me? Me? Not Tara or even Carl?" I chuckled. "Well, I definitely wouldn't believe Carl. He's a womanizer. But you were right. I would have been angry at you for even suggesting Tara was cheating on me. Why then try to bring me back to negotiations?" "Ethan didn't think you'd run away," Teddy said. "He thought you'd go straight to Carl and demand he be kicked out, which I immediately suggested." "Or you'd just leave Leadfoot," Teddy finished. "At this point, I was going to show you Teddy's reworked songs, get you a record deal, and save your career," Ethan added. "Oh, and help you find a new bass player." "And you helped him with this?" I asked Teddy. His silence told me everything. I was angry, but I couldn't blame them. Sure, Ethan cared about his wallet, but he also cared about me and Leadfoot. Then it dawned on me. Okay, if this was all to save Leadfoot and get Teddy back into songwriting, then what was this afternoon? Columbia has never seen anything like this, Ethan said. Those scenes on YouTube are amazing. You are in them, and this guarantees great interest. But there's much more to it. They're like that British girl on that show, Susan Boyle. The rumor spread across the internet like wildfire. Monty checked before we got here, and already there are over 20 million views on 3 of the 7 videos. And the other 4 have over 15 million, and you probably can't ignore Bob Dylan, right? Teddy smiled lazily. If you want to keep your job at Columbia, then no, Ethan confirmed. So they wanted to see if there was a way to make money from it. Right after Dylan called, Monty called me and asked if I thought it could work. The 2 of you together again. I went straight to his house and showed him the reworked songs. He looked through them and threw the entire folder on the floor. Ethan smiled. If I had shown him these songs from the beginning, we would have already signed a contract. And now we'd be kicking Carl out of the group right in the middle of it. At this point, my anger disappeared, and it was hard not to smile. So now he's really screwed, I said. It's worse than you think, Ethan replied, relieved I wasn't mad anymore. He's almost broke. Is that true? Teddy asked. Ethan nodded. He spends money faster than he earns, and unlike you two, he has no income from song copyrights. He gets some money from album sales, but it can't support his lavish lifestyle. Nick, you and Tara have a nice house in Brentwood. But you've seen Carl's properties, right? His ski lodge in Aspen, his apartment in New York, his mansion in Malibu. I think he just bought a house in London. What the hell is he going to do in London? I asked, laughing. Chase London girls? Teddy suggested, causing everyone to laugh knowingly. We finished shredding the pork and placed it in serving trays. I stayed behind as Ethan carried the first tray through the kitchen door. Teddy, I called, and he stopped. I'm really sorry, buddy. He turned around. I may have been more harsh than I meant, he said. I shook my head. No, you were right. I didn't show up, and I can't believe I missed the wedding invitation. He smiled lazily. I may have exaggerated a little. I sent it to your home address during your world tour, knowing you wouldn't get it in time. Sorry, old friend, but I just wanted a normal wedding with the members of Leadfoot. It would have been anything but normal. Moron, I said. Moron, he replied. We took the trays out onto the terrace and placed them next to the buns on the serving tables. As I turned to the crowd, I noticed Amy watching me with a thoughtful expression. Teddy walked up to her, kissed her forehead, and whispered something. She turned to me, her face relaxing. I smiled, and she smiled back. Then it hit me because I wanted to be the one to kiss her forehead and whisper soothing words to her. I took a beer and stood in the corner, alone with my thoughts. I realized Tara had cheated on me more than once, and it seemed like it had been going on for some time. There was no doubt I would never be able to forget it, and my marriage was officially on a downward slope. However, I decided to take Teddy's advice and at least listen to her. After 5 years together, I wanted to know the whole truth about what she did, or at least as much as she was willing to tell. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around. Penny for your thoughts, Amy said softly. I just remember what my father said. Sometimes you are a dove and sometimes you are a monument. She laughed, her face lighting up with joy. I had never heard her laugh before, and I felt happiness in giving her this moment of laughter. So who are you? She asked. Dove or monument? I shrugged and smiled. I don't know yet, but things are clearly looking up. I had no idea what awaited me tomorrow. You better get up, Walter muttered in my ear. I turned around, surprised to see him so early. The clock on the bedside table showed a little after 9, and I had gotten enough sleep. What is the problem? I asked. He looked out the window and then back at me. The little cheater didn't wait. She's on the morning shows telling everyone she's leaving you because you're a womanizer. I smiled. It was some kind of strange dream. I thought you just said, I said get out of bed, he thundered. The blankets flew off me as if torn away by an invisible hand. I froze. He had never done anything like this before, and I didn't even know he could move things. Yes, he said, like a real ghost. Now get your ass up and get ready. The press will be here any minute. He was right, and I hastily cleaned myself up. 15 minutes later, I stood in the kitchen looking at Dr. Bob, who was fidgeting nervously, and Carol, who was angry. Have you already heard? Carol demanded. I nodded, and she didn't ask how I knew. Is it true? She barked. I shook my head. Not once, I said. I told you so, Bob said, patting me on the shoulder. The home phone rang. Carol picked it up, said hello, and handed it to me. It's Ethan, she said. Good morning, I said into the phone. Not yet, he replied, sounding more cheerful than I expected. But soon the morning will be really good. What's happening? I asked. Looks like they were in a hurry, he said. Tara's agents and PR people decided you weren't coming back, so they started protecting her image and making her a victim. I nodded. My God, why did she do this without talking to me? I would have stayed silent. This kind of crap was the last thing either of us needed. How do you think you can cope with this? I asked. I'll tell you when you arrive, he answered. Where to go? To Teddy's house, he said. Wait until the first media representatives arrive, then get in the car and come here. Why wait? So that they follow you here. There's no point in putting your mother through this crap on a Sunday morning. What about Teddy's family? We're okay, Teddy said on the other line. Half an hour later, I pulled into Teddy's driveway, followed by a convoy of news vans. They had learned their lesson from yesterday because they all parked on the side of the road and none of them entered Teddy's property. What's happened? I asked, entering Teddy's living room. This is it, Teddy said. He turned on his TiVo and the talk show began. I watched as the presenter, her voice dripping with false sincerity, asked Tara, There are rumors that your marriage is under threat. Is there any truth to it? Tara tried to smile but couldn't. It was great acting, I admit. I'd seen her do it 1,000,000 times. The presenter, sensing an opportunity, pressed on. I'm sorry if this is inconvenient for you, but there are rumors in Hollywood that you have started dating Carl Simpson, your husband's colleague in the band Lead Foot. Is this true? Tara began to speak softly, and the camera zoomed in on her feigned expression of pain. Carl and I are friends, she said. I admit we were seen together, but he was there solely as a friend to support me during this extremely painful time in my life. The presenter could hardly contain her joy. And what painful things are happening in your life now? Tara looked straight at the presenter and switched to a look of determination. Nick has had several affairs, she said. Carl was the one who told me about it. I didn't believe him at first, but my agent, who is also one of my oldest and closest friends, insisted that I try to confirm the stories of Nick's infidelity. We confirmed that Carl was telling the truth. How many women has Nick dated? Asked the presenter, unable to hide her happiness. I'd rather not discuss this, Tara said. Suffice it to say that I confronted him with my discoveries last Wednesday, and he left. I haven't seen him since. Teddy turned off the TV and faced me. He tried to maintain his lazy smile but looked upset. Ethan, on the other hand, was smiling. Well, Ethan said, it looks like events got ahead of us. I nodded. It seemed like our planned conversation with Tara wouldn't happen. She forced me to act, and now I had to play the cards she dealt me and get rid of her from my life. Now the choice is yours, Ethan continued. We can either let her get away with it or bury her. I raised my eyebrows and looked at him, waiting for him to continue. I documented her affair from the moment I found out, Ethan said. We have photographs, videos, and testimony. After our discussion yesterday, I also reached out to Los Angeles and asked some people to dig deeper. We may have even more information soon. My jaw dropped. Is there anything else? I asked. Yes, Ethan answered. It looks like she slept with several of her co-stars. Half the cast and most of the crew know about it, and some are willing to share the details. A cold chill ran through me. It was standard Hollywood stuff, but I never suspected my marriage or my loving wife was involved. The past few days had shown that I was just part of her facade of the American sweetheart. She was bright, funny, charming, and a loving wife. Now. So what will it be? Ethan asked. I looked at Teddy. He looked straight at me, his jaw clenching and unclenching nervously. Bury the bitch, Jenny shouted from the kitchen. I giggled. And you? I asked Teddy. He nodded. Talking won't change anything, partner. I think you now have all the answers to where your marriage stands. Then let's discuss options, I told Ethan. What if we don't do anything? Doing nothing means your career will suffer. This will make any new recording negotiations for Mustang Ranch difficult. Come on, I said. This kind of stuff happens all the time. It didn't hurt Mick Jagger, did it? Ethan laughed. No, he agreed. But Mick Jagger's whole image has always been the bad guy. Yours has always been a quiet, thoughtful poet. Nice guy. If you don't challenge this, you risk destroying this image. From Columbia's perspective, they risk losing millions due to the unknown. Remember, Nick, you have a huge following among both country fans and rock audiences. Rock fans don't care, but old Marge in backwoods Mississippi, who goes to church every Sunday and drags her husband along, she's going to have a problem with you. I looked out the window at the line of news vans along the road, then turned back to Ethan. Okay, I said, tell me how to do it. His smile stretched from ear to ear, and he opened his case. 20 minutes later, Teddy held a press conference in the barn. The reporters were ready when I walked in and headed to the front. Nick! They shouted in unison, followed by a stream of questions that drowned out everything. When they finally quieted down, I began. Same rules as yesterday, friends, I said. Let's start with the ladies, then go from left to right with the men. I looked at the young girl who started yesterday. Sorry, but you already started first yesterday, I said. Then I turned to the elegantly dressed professional who was second yesterday. Mr. Haaland, she began. Her tone was condescending, and her eyes glowed with anger. She was either angry at my evasions yesterday or furious that I was so blatantly unfaithful to poor Tara Boyd. Ethan suspected she would be the perfect first choice, and her tone told me everything was going according to plan. Miss Lockhart, I answered, trying to keep an innocent expression of pain on my face. Mr. Haaland, your wife told Valerie Plymouth this morning that you ruined your marriage with a series of affairs. Is there any truth to her accusations? I took a deep breath, turned to make eye contact with the assembled reporters, then turned back to the reporter who thought she had me cornered. I'm sorry to say this, but Tara was partly right, I began. At that moment, dozens of flashes illuminated me and temporarily blinded me. This helped me keep a grimace of pain on my face as I continued. Tara was right that our marriage is truly over. However, she was wrong in saying that I had ever cheated on her or our marriage. With that, I took the contents out of the envelope. Then I turned to the young girl from Entertainment Tonight. Your turn, Miss Miller, I said. So you claim that you have never cheated on your wife? Not once, I said. If she has evidence to the contrary, as she stated this morning, I would very much like to see it, because I'll tell you the truth. Until Wednesday afternoon, when I walked in on my wife and one of my oldest friends in the world having sex in our house, I thought we had the perfect marriage. Now, however, I know that this is not true. Are you saying that she cheated? Asked the first man in line as the flashes illuminated me again and the cameras and microphones moved closer. Unfortunately, I said, that's exactly what I'm saying. Do you have evidence of this? Demanded the first reporter, her disbelief obvious. Ignoring her, I turned to the next man. Your turn, I said. He looked at the first reporter and smiled. Do you have evidence to support your accusations? He asked. This report was prepared by investigators in Malibu, California, I said, holding the documents for everyone to see. As you will all soon see, my wife was less than truthful this morning, and this report will prove it. In what ways was she not truthful? Asked the next reporter. She has had an intense physical relationship with Carl Simpson for at least the last 2 months, I said, my voice shaking. I paused to collect my thoughts, savoring the role of the betrayed husband. This report contains dates, times, photographs, and more. Do you know the names of others? Someone shouted. I don't really want to get into this, I said, putting the report back into the envelope. My manager will provide you with an edited version of this report shortly. For now, I want you all to understand one thing. I loved my wife with all my heart and thought she loved me back. I have been faithful to our marriage and to Tara from the day we met and would never do anything to jeopardize our marriage. I never cheated on her and intended to stay faithful forever. Unfortunately, it was a terrible shock to learn that Tara did not feel or act the same. Questions began to fly in a wall of sound. Again, I ignored them, raising my hands for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, I know you all have many more questions. However, I ask that you respect my desire and need to deal with all of this privately, with the few family and friends who have offered me their support since I found out a few days ago. With that, I turned around and walked out of the barn, leaving Ethan to handle the rest. "How was it?" Teddy asked. I was exhausted. It had been fun for a while, but now that it was over, the reality hit me. My marriage was dead. My wife had betrayed me repeatedly, and I had never suspected anything, and now the whole world would be watching this unfold. Jenny hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "You really deserve better, Nick," she repeated. All I could do was hug her back and try to hold back my tears. I succeeded, but it was difficult. By noon, the press had left, and the guys from the band drove up to the house. "Already have news?" Jimbo asked. "He'll be here in about an hour," Ethan said. This was the first I heard about it. Seeing my gaze, Teddy spoke. "Nothing has been decided yet," he said. "Let's see what they say, and then we'll discuss it among ourselves, okay?" I shrugged. It couldn't hurt to listen, but I was surprised that Teddy seemed to actually be considering this seriously. 45 minutes later, Monty pulled into the driveway in a Lexus SUV. Once we were all seated in the living room, Monty began. "Columbia wants to sign you to a recording contract," he said. Rob and Jimbo exchanged high fives, and Will pumped his fist, enthused. "Conditions?" Teddy asked. Monty laid them out. They weren't particularly good at first, but included bonuses if album sales met or exceeded expectations. Overall, it was almost as good as the terms offered for Leadfoot, which was surprising given Leadfoot's proven longevity and popularity. However, they recognized that my participation was necessary for this deal, and Monty made this very clear from the beginning. "So Leadfoot is dead?" I asked. He nodded. "Tara's antics this morning guaranteed it," he said. "Your answer, though excellent for you, is killing the group. They have no interest in re-signing with Leadfoot while this chaos is starting." "What if we get rid of Carl?" Ethan suggested. Monty shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Then we'd have to deal with the unknown, the new band member, and how well he fits at the start of a new contract. And, of course, there's also the problem of songwriting." Monty turned to Teddy. "They don't just want Nick," Monty said. "They need songs. And you. They think there is great chemistry between you. All of you." He looked around at everyone in the group to make sure they understood. "We need all five or nothing. Honestly, the guys think they could only handle Teddy and Nick, but I convinced them otherwise. You give a really different sound, something we don't hear much and would like to explore more. However, it's a risk that record companies don't often take. That's why they have such conditions. They don't think they can lose with Teddy and Nick involved, but I'm sure the benefits will come from what all five do." Monty waited patiently while we all took it in. "I have a condition," Teddy said. Looking at the others, he added, "As long as you guys want to do it." I watched as Will, Rob, and Jimbo nodded vigorously. Teddy's eyes then locked onto mine, waiting for a reaction. "I'm interested," I said. "Looks like I won't have anything else to do, right?" This was enough for Teddy, and he continued. "I have a family," he said. "They will always come first." I smiled, feeling that this was going in the right direction. Monty seemed unsure what to do. "So I'm giving it 2 years and 2 albums," Teddy continued. "I'll take a leave of absence from work, but if in 2 years I'm not happy with it, if it's going to hurt my family, I want to be able to get out after the second album. Does anyone have a problem with this?" Teddy asked. We all shook our heads except Monty. "This may change some conditions," he said. "The conditions don't change," Teddy replied. "All that will change is that we can abandon the third album if I want to leave. And if they or you don't want to continue without me, what do we get in return?" Monty asked. Teddy smiled, and I realized he had already thought this through. "If we stay together, you get an automatic option for a 4th album on the same terms as the 3rd, he said. "And I will not have the right to back out of the 4th album." Monty thought about this for a moment, then spoke. "I think I can sell this," he said. "When do you think you can give me an answer on the rest?" "Give us a couple of hours, Monty," Ethan said. "Go have lunch and be back here by 3. Try to confirm that the conditions suit you, and we will give you an answer in a couple of hours." Jenny entered the room as Monty left. "So how is it?" she asked. "They're offering us a really sweet deal," Teddy told her. She nodded, biting her lip and turning to me. "Will you take care of him for me?" she asked. I looked from her to Teddy, then to Ethan, Rob, Will, and Jimbo. They held their breath, waiting to find out whether I agreed or not. Then I saw Amy standing in the kitchen doorway with her son in her arms and an uncertain expression on her face. "So how is it?" Ethan pushed. Here I stood, a few hours after finding out my marriage was over. Then, to top it all off, I find out that the group that has been everything to me for the last 10 years no longer exists. And oh yeah, I have 2 hours to decide whether to start it all over again with an old friend I hadn't seen in years until recently, and 3 virtual strangers. Without saying a word, I went outside to get some fresh air. 10 minutes later, my thoughts were interrupted by a quiet presence behind me. "I think Teddy really wants to try it now," Amy said. "He's been talking about this all these last years. He regretted leaving the group. That's why he gave all those songs to Ethan. He wanted to return." I turned to her. "This is all too sudden, you know," I said. She nodded, her face full of sympathy. "I mean, damn, I just wanted some time to think, to take it all in," I said. "Now there is no such time." She put her hand on my shoulder. "I don't think so," she said. "Teddy and Jenny will take care of you. They will be there for you. The band, well, it'll give you something to do to take your mind off things. Right?" She was right, of course. In fact, I couldn't imagine better company in this sudden storm that seemed to only be gaining momentum. "What about you?" I asked. She was surprised by this. "What about me? If I do this, return to the road, to the studio, and continue to do this, how will you feel about it?" She didn't blink. She saw it coming, even if I just thought about it. "How I feel about it doesn't matter," she said. She took my hand and led me across the grass towards the trees in the backyard. "Nick," she said, "we're not here now. There are you and me, but there is no us, okay?" I was silent, and she seemed ready to explain it all in my silence. "Yes, I like you," she said, "from what I saw. But we are not the same people we once were, and we never knew each other then. I'm just a vision from your past, someone you think you'll be comfortable with after everything that's happened to you. Everything that's happening to you right now. Nick, do you understand this?" She was right. My head was in the clouds, and I was enjoying visions long forgotten. "But maybe I want to get to know you better now," I said. "It's normal," she whispered. "Then this is what we'll do, okay? We get to know each other. But I'm not going to jump into your bed, Nick. Not now. Not after your marriage just ended. I don't need this, and my son certainly doesn't need me to go through something like this again in the near future." I listened, looking into her eyes. I heard her, and deep down I knew she was absolutely right. But still I leaned over and kissed her. Then, as I gently pulled her closer for more, she pulled away. "Damn it, Nick," she said, anger and embarrassment coloring her face and making her eyes sparkle. "Did you even listen to anything I just said?" "Thank you," I whispered back. "At least you gave me good dreams for a while and something to look forward to in the future." Her anger dissipated, and she hugged me tightly. I responded, enjoying the feel of her body against mine. "Enjoy it," she muttered. "That's all you'll get from me for a while." I enjoyed it, and as she said, this was the extent of our contact for a while. Back at the house, everyone gathered in the living room. I heard quiet conversation as Amy and I entered through the kitchen door, but their conversation stopped, and all eyes turned to me as we entered the front room. Amy sat down on the couch, leaving a seat for me next to her. I sat down, looked at her, then at everyone else. "Okay," I said. "I have made several decisions, and I have my own requirements for this." Rob and Jimbo exchanged high fives again, and Will clenched his fist. I smiled at their enthusiasm and hoped they were ready for what they were getting into. "What are your requirements?" Teddy asked. "I will not lead this group," I said. "Of course not, Nick," Teddy said. "This is a partnership. We will all make decisions together." I shook my head. "It doesn't work that way, Teddy," I said. "You guys make decisions and coordinate them with me. But that's all. I don't want to make decisions anymore." I turned to Ethan. "This has been a problem with Leadfoot for too long. I felt like the whole world rested on my shoulders and mine alone. It was like I was babysitting a bunch of 2-year-olds. Now it's time for someone to babysit me." Ethan looked at Teddy, who then turned to me and spoke. "Do you want to have a veto on everything?" Teddy asked. I nodded. "This doesn't mean I'm against democracy. You guys make decisions and then come back to me to make sure I agree, okay? It gives me a chance to know what you're thinking and where we're going. It also lets me change something if it's a bad idea. And I only mean the big decisions. Teddy, I don't care what we have for dinner or where we stay or within reason who we hire. Ethan already knows all this stuff. I looked at all four of them and leaned forward. There aren't many rules here, guys. Trust me, if three of us start teaming up against the other two, we won't make it. So everyone must agree on all important decisions anyway, but I don't want to make decisions or even participate in the process anymore, okay? Think of it more as you just keeping me informed after you've made decisions yourselves. Teddy looked at the other guys, and they all either shrugged or nodded. Guys, I said, I'm not in a position to make these decisions right now. I have too much going on in my head, so if you want me, these are my terms. Otherwise, we are standard and equal partners in everything. Songwriting is a different topic, of course, but everyone will have a chance at it if you want. That's fine with me, Will said. Rob looked at Jimbo, got his consent, then said, us too. I looked at Teddy. Well, partner, you wanted it, and now you have it. Do you agree? Teddy looked at Jenny, who nodded, albeit thoughtfully. I guess so, he said, his eyes remaining on Jenny. When Monty returned, he had the master agreements prepared for Ethan to submit to our lawyers for review. Columbia agreed to Teddy's terms, and they didn't need to know about my terms. It was just between Ethan and my bandmates. Anyway, in the last 5 days, I'd left one of the biggest rock bands and one of the most famous and beautiful wives in the world. Now, before I could catch my breath, I was starting all over again with a new group and a new company. And all this time, only 2 questions were running through my head. Why did Tara betray me so horribly and for so long? And would I ever find happiness again with someone new like Amy? I received an answer to my first question around noon the next day. Teddy and I sat late Sunday night working on 2 songs. 2 of my songs that he had reworked and now needed a final polish. Around 11 on Monday, Will, Rob, and Jimbo joined us in the barn and began working on arrangements for the first song, When I Get Back. Will was a pleasant surprise in terms of arrangement. He continually offered fresh takes on pacing and arrangements, transforming a slow ballad into rockabilly with dual lead vocals and a shimmering backdrop highlighted by pulsating guitar, driving bass, solid drums, and a complimentary piano line. I never imagined this song would be performed like this. Previously, Leadfoot had no piano other than a guest studio musician for 1 or 2 songs, and the new arrangement turned out to be much better with the new lineup. Teddy was the first to see her. I was standing with my back to the barn door, watching Jimbo on drums and playing acoustic guitar, when Teddy's guitar line was interrupted by a squeal. I turned to him, laughing, and suddenly all the joy left my heart. "Hi, Nick," Tara said. She looked terrible. I knew from Ethan that the press was actively inflating her scandal. It seemed that the private detective's report was confirmed and new stories surfaced almost every hour. "What do you want?" I said, my voice sounding harsh. "Guys," Teddy intervened, "let's go inside the house for a while." They got out of there as quickly as they could, Rob and Jimbo keeping their eyes on Tara as they passed. If they play right, they can have her, I thought. When we were alone, I sat down on one of the chairs and waited. I did not hide my anger and contempt for her, and she shifted unsteadily at the entrance to the barn. Then she whispered something, but I didn't hear it. "What?" I asked again. "I asked if you could call the dogs away," she said, tears streaming down her face. It was real, I thought, remembering that she couldn't cry on command. "Just tell them to stop. You've proven your point." "I didn't start this fight," I said, my voice rising. "And now you, who told everyone that I'm cheating, dare ask me to do something that you yourself couldn't do for me." "It wasn't my idea. It was Giannis," she pleaded, confirming my suspicions that her manager was behind this. "He said you would destroy me if I wasn't proactive." "Nonsense," I barked. "She said you could turn crap into pâté, didn't she?" Tara didn't try to deny it. "You were going to leave me," she said. "You cheated on me," I replied. Anger flared through her tears. "Oh, grow up," she hissed. "You knew about it." I was stunned. "How could you think so?" "Have you never read the tabloids?" she said. "God, they printed almost all the rumors about our affairs." "But you denied everything," I replied. "I stopped asking, thinking it was just regular crap." She was silent, wiping away tears and looking at the floor. God, Tara, with Carl you knew that? I didn't suspect anything, right? She nodded. So why did you think I knew about the others? You knew I'd be furious. That's why you kept it a secret. So you also knew that I would be furious about the others, right? She nodded again, no longer trying to make me an indifferent husband. So how many were there? I asked. Does it matter? You know most of them now, or at least Ethan knows. So are they all true? She nodded. And that's not it. Is it just most of them? Her look told me that she realized she had said too much. Can we survive this, Nick? If I stop, can we survive this? I laughed, and her pout turned into indignation at the rejection. Let me ask you a question, Tara. Imagine that every time someone came to your house, they stole something. Not once, but a couple of dozen times. You find out about this? Are you going to invite them again? I asked. These aren't our guests, Nick, she shouted. This is our damn marriage. Exactly. You stole something much more important than silverware, Tara. You stole my self-respect. You destroyed what I thought was perfect. Now I wonder if we even had a marriage. Did you ever love me, or was I just part of a PR stunt? She started crying again. You were never a PR stunt, she sobbed. I loved you from the day we met. More than anyone, Nick. You have to believe that. That's where you're wrong, I said. You always loved yourself more than you loved me. Her expression showed that I hit the mark. What you told me earlier, she said on the phone. It's true, right? Yes, Tara, I said, knowing what she meant. I've been faithful to you from day one. She nodded, wiping away her tears. You're right, she finally said. I don't deserve you. Damn it, I wouldn't stay married to myself either. She came over and touched my face with her fingertips. Please, Nick, for old time's sake, can you call off the dogs? And the divorce will be based on the marriage contract without protracted litigation or further attacks on me in the press. She smiled and nodded. I swear. What about my things from the house? I asked. They're in my car, she answered, nodding toward the entrance. I nodded, thinking about it. Damn it, I thought. It will end quickly and without hassle. I won't have to go back to Los Angeles, and I'll be done with her in a few strokes of the pen. Best of all, I realized that the events of the last few days had already ruined her image as much as possible, and Carl is now a voice from my past and nothing more. Okay, I said. The divorce is filed immediately. Irreconcilable differences, and I see the proposed settlement documents before next Monday and everything goes smoothly. Can you do it? She hugged me. I promise, she said. You do it, and I will respond to the dogs. Do you think you can call them off now? The faster I have the documents, the faster I will respond. Ethan, I called. She looked unhappy but got more than she expected. Thank you, Nick, she whispered. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. And Nick? I looked at her one last time as my wife. Yes, Tara. I'm really sorry, she said, tears welling up again, for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you, and I still love you. I'm sorry too, I said, deciding to call off the dogs for now and just reveal the whole dirty story if she broke her word. This time, she kept her word. The settlement documents were delivered by personal courier the next morning. Here is the complete true story of those crazy 5 days. Carl went bankrupt about 18 months ago. He was forced to sell all those fancy houses and now lives in a smaller house in Malibu. He plays in some studio sessions and can still be seen with some starlets. Vince, our drummer in Leadfoot, has retired from music entirely. He made a series of successful investments and now never has to work a day in his life if he keeps track of things. Now he's somewhere in Scotland, painting landscapes and playing golf. We talk every couple of months, and he's expressed interest in possibly being on our new album. Will has some great ideas for double percussion, like the old Allman Brothers band. John Bowman, Leadfoot's guitar virtuoso, is now our producer. He's still going strong and works well with Teddy and Will in arranging what are said to be great songs. He produces other bands in both Nashville and Los Angeles. Like Vince, he was tired of touring, and it all worked out well for him. Tara, of course, was fired from the show when ratings plummeted after her divorce. The divorce went quickly, and of course I called off the dogs immediately. But the damage had already been done, and the press continued to dig up dirt. She makes cameo appearances, but her reputation has taken a serious hit, and it will be a long time before she becomes America's sweetheart again. It's funny, but Rob eventually started dating her. He told me about it before I read about it somewhere, all embarrassed and worried that I would be angry. I just laughed, especially when he said that they spent the entire evening in bed, and she kept asking and talking about me. Rob admitted that he would have lost interest if she weren't so damn beautiful and energetic. Poor Tara. Mustang Ranch, somewhere in Nevada, tried to deceive us by using their registered name, and we decided not to allow such deception, even if they are professionals in this matter. Will constantly brought his basset hound to rehearsals, and his name was General Beauregard. We all agreed that it would be a great name for the band. It doesn't matter what they say below the Mason-Dixon line. We are not named after a Confederate general, although the dog may have been. 5 months later, the first album of the group, General Beauregard, was released to rave reviews. This album, Another Happy Face, features the real General Beauregard on the cover. It eventually sold 8 million copies and spawned 2 #1 singles on the rock charts and 3 top 10s on the country charts. Our next album, Saturday Night Drive-In, released at the start of our first big tour, surpassed the first and went platinum, selling 11 million copies in less than a year. The tour sold out before we played the first show, and the reviews for it were, if possible, better than the reviews for the albums. Teddy seems to be handling it all quite well. He takes Jenny and the girls on tour, and they travel in his bus. I sometimes join them to work on songs, but we rarely get anything done with the noise all the kids make. Well, Teddy has little girls, plus there's Brighton and Walter. Walter, as you all know from the huge cover story in People, was born 10 months ago to Nick and Amy Haaland, a small-town boy who made it big, and his beautiful high school sweetheart. That's what they said in the article. But now, you know, it was just a story Ethan and the PR guys came up with. The real story was a bit longer. It took almost 8 months after that weekend before Amy agreed to go on a date with me. Several more months passed before she finally accepted the proposal I'd made on every date since the very first one. It proved to me that the rumors about quiet and reserved girls are absolutely true. Since then, she has spent almost every free minute trying to make me happy. I'm not over it yet, and I hope she keeps finding new ways to surprise me. We live in a house not far from Teddy and Jenny and their girls. We've managed to maintain a sense of normalcy in Grand City, where everyone has known us for most of our lives and doesn't care how much we make. And Walter? Well, I'll leave that for another day and another story. Just know that he has forgiven me and says hi to you all. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.